Federal agencies have been perhaps among the biggest pioneers in harnessing AI and ML to deal with large-scale issues in the public sector. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about some of the practical potential of AI in government are Sanjay Koyani, Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor, and Steve Heibein, Artificial Intelligence Evangelist at Hewlett Packard Enterprise for U.S. Federal. Sanjay and Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, Sanjay, I'd like to start with you. Give us a sense, if you will, for the Department of Labor's journey in harnessing AI and ML, and perhaps talk about a challenge or two that the department was actually facing and how AI helped advance its efforts in serving the public.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Wyatt. So I'm about a year and a half into my CTO work at DOL. And coming in, there's lots of AI work that is going on in the federal government and certainly going on in DOL. In our chief information officer shop, we converted to a completely shared service environment about a few years back, where now all of the agencies, IT applications, and staff were consolidated as a shared service entity through the CIO office. And so one area that we're very focused on is how do we create value and impact for the agencies, and how do we leverage some of these new technologies to drive that work? So in my role as CTO and coming in and re-looking at the office, one thing I established was an emerging technology program specifically to start looking at how do we use artificial intelligence, emerging technology like RPA to really advance some of our programmatic work. And so our journey now is to really understand what are the agency's business needs. We then determine what solutions are best for those, and emerging tech, artificial intelligence, and so forth are things that we see as really having an application. An area that we're starting to look at right now, especially as we've moved to a real cloud-driven environment, is what kind of cognitive services our agency is looking for that AI and cloud can really help to advance. So we started doing a lot of pilots around speech to text, text to speech, translation services, form recognition services, and even some things around how to identify fraud. And by having these cloud services available, and a lot of them have AI enabled already on that, we're able to turn that on and add we create for the agency. Or also, where are there areas where we could really improve services based on some pilots we want to drive forward. One thing that I'll say, White, that's really been important to our journey is that because the AI program is relatively new, we've been looking at how do we create a framework for how we deliver this beyond just these pilots. So one thing early on in the process was to assess agency readiness, and the importance of culture and culture change and agencies' willingness and readiness to participate in some of these areas. And so that's not lost on us. One thing we have are these client engagement managers that work with the different agencies, and they go out and they try to understand what are the needs, where can we create education around the benefits of artificial intelligence and cloud innovation to the work that they're doing. And so that engagement, that understanding, knowing what people are ready for is really key. The other thing that we created with the AI program was an innovation, incubation, and testing program. So as we're testing out these AI services, how do we formally have the process for determining proof of concepts, pilots, KPIs? Is the juice worth the squeeze on what we're trying to test out? And if the capability isn't mature enough, do we really want to continue going with it, or is there another cloud-enabled AI service that could really do the job better? And we found that, like with translation services, we tried out a couple of different cloud-based services. It turned out that for our needs, Google at the time was delivering the best AI translation services for what the agency was trying to do. So understanding that having a good business case. And the other key thing that we've really learned along the way is the importance of governance and operations, that whenever we want to do these things, we need to get our security folks involved on the front end. We need to get the operations folks involved in the front end. the first thing our chief information officer will ask us is, where's the cost model? And how are we going to not only build this thing out, but pay for it over time? So those key elements and having those discussions on the front end, as well as do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the staff? And are we able to sustain what we're creating, are all really important maturity elements that we try to build into our thinking and our ability to predictably and more reliably deliver these services.
Well, it certainly sounds like the Department of Labor has put into place a lot of really important foundational elements. Thank you for describing those. Steve, as you hear what Sanjay's talking about at Department of Labor, how would you kind of put that in the context of what you're seeing more broadly in the federal government and the progress the government's making in applying AI and ML?
Well, I think it's interesting when you think of the government as sort of like a microcosm of what's going on in the commercial space, right? You have health and life science in the commercial space, the vertical. We've got that in federal. You've got financial services in the commercial. We have that in federal. So when you look at each one of the agencies, we've got manufacturing. We actually even have retail in some ways, if you want to look at it, with the security, constituent services, things that are going on. So what's interesting is Sanjay and the Department of Labor's journey is not untypical. It's really, when you start looking at it, it's a path that most people have to go. The things that you're doing, like sort of like a center of excellence, and building out this center of excellence, starting out with prototypes and proofs of value along the way. These are very typical within the federal government space. And I'm seeing those types of successes that once you build on it, you're getting the funding, you're getting the support from management to also show, I see where this is going to be a value. And you had even mentioned, Sanjay, about looking at this, is the squeeze worth the juice that's coming out of it? And it's very true. A lot of things we're doing, you get, okay, I learned, but what's the next step? And moving from proof of concept to be able to get into production with some of these has been the biggest challenge I find a lot of agencies have.
Well, Sanjay, I'm curious. I'd like to dive a little deeper. Can you describe a little further about what was involved in ensuring that you had the right data to apply in AI instances? And then you talked about deciding, moving from pilot into production. Can you talk a little bit also about what you're learning about that process so that you can, in fact, get AI into production?
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve, really good points. I'll just say one thing off of what you were mentioning is that the very first question, especially when you're dealing with a shared service environment, and we're looking at how do we create value. You don't have a lot of room to just experiment with things that may not go anywhere. Like our chief information officer always says, every dollar we put towards IT takes away from the mission. And we know that it's an enabler, but it really becomes, I can't emphasize the importance of really thinking through, like, what are we trying to do and how sustainable, scalable, and aligned with the mission it is for us to do this kind of work. But why, back to your question, I think we look at the first thing we do when we're going through these processes is, where is the data coming from? Is it coming from legacy systems, cloud-based systems? And are we going to be able to get that data to drive some of this work? The one nice thing we've seen with the artificial intelligence tools that we've been exploring in the cloud is that even if it's drawing from legacy systems, that some of these tools are able to pull from legacy cloud and still be able to deliver in a predictable way some of these enhanced solutions, even working off of older systems. The one that I'd like to highlight here, and I mentioned it earlier, was our form recognizer services that we've been looking at in the cloud. And as way of example, we've been working with one of our agencies to explore how form recognition technology using AI models could assist agencies in speeding labor enforcement assessments or benefit eligibility assessments so that they can make faster decisions. And so with one of our agencies, our claim examiners needed to assess benefit eligibility for claimants using a manual process that took a significant amount of time. They had to go through a significant amount of forms to assess and categorize them and to make these determinations so that they knew whether or not a benefit was applicable. And so in 3 months and using one of our cloud services, we were able to map out the current process, identify what the data sets were that we needed, they were accessible, train a cloud model that was already in our environment to assess and structure the forms. And this through, and again, we created the KPIs on the front end, we brought the right players to the table. I'm not going through all those pieces there, but by training the model and having individuals in our work with this, experiment with it, and get the model to predictably perform, we were able to ensure that the relevant forms were getting to the examiners and reducing a significant amount of their time. We're still working on the KPIs, but the speed on this was significant, and we're also assessing the error rates that might have taken place with folks doing some of this more lower value work. And so that's I think a good example of where we're seeing all these forms that are coming in, and where all these manual processes could be significantly improved as we look at enforcement, we look at benefits eligibility, and we look at a number of things that are going on in the labor environment.
Additionally, Sanjay, talk to us a little bit about how you're approaching the need for establishing responsible AI at your organization.
Thank you, Wyatt. So one area that we're looking at is an important area for how we approach AI is in responsible ethical AI. And so we've been assessing what criteria and factors should be considered when we assess how AI is applied as a solution to some of the work that we're doing. So it's not just enough, is it technically sound, is it delivering AI in the way that it was intended, but the other thing we're looking at is it also doing it in an equitable way. And an example here is we brought in a presidential innovation fellow with expertise in this space to build out a model and apply it to our projects. And one example we looked at was at improving placement or job placement in an agency using AI-enabled technology to make sure that candidates or their loved ones that want to rejoin the workforce were getting placed in the right job. And based on the criteria that our presidential innovation fellow created, we were better able to assess not only is this AI application working, but also is it placing people in an equitable way. And when we had a chance to look at both of those, we found that the technology was there, but the criteria we were assessing it against wasn't adding up. And if we had had this technology, at the beginning of this project, which has been going on for a year now, we would have made very different decisions on the front end as to what technology we were going to use and what factors we were going to explore to determine its value and impact. So understanding that on the front end is really key to making sure that we're looking at the right lens.
You bring up a good point. Is too often what we do is we go first at it's a technical solution. And you point out a great point that you got to bring in all other parts of the business in there. So,
yeah, absolutely. And we've often found that not just bringing in other parts of the agency, but I mean, this administration is very focused on equity. Making sure that we're doing things in a responsible way is important. And so factoring in who needs to be at the table on the front end, but also what kind of lenses do we need to look at this from on the front end can really save time and improve.
You talked about robotic process automation and forms. I mean, if you look at the federal government, there's not an agency that doesn't move paper as part of that, not necessarily part of their mission, but it's something that has to happen as part of their mission. And so do you believe that this could work? Some of the systems that you're doing could be duplicated in other agencies?
We do, and one thing that's really compelling is on the federal side, as people are creating some of these automations, they're starting to share it. So I'll get contact every once in a while from another agency saying, "Hey, I saw you guys created an automated system for assessing, your grant applications, and can we get access to that?" So there's also a lot of this broader sharing across government and trying to document these pieces, because if something's been created and generated, we ought not try to recreate it. And so those investments are really important to not only create, but to share.
Well, finally, Steve, I'd like to jump back to you and ask what additional best practices that you might suggest, and particularly when it comes to deciding on how best to tap high performance computing, because obviously AI requires a lot of crunching. So what would you suggest on that?
Well, I mean, it ranges. When you look at some of the tasks, robotic process automation is probably a very low requirement of technology. And when you look at something like the US Postal Service, what they did is they've got 200 servers located at the edge. So they're edge servers with 4 to 8 GPUs in each. It's basically a large class server at each location where they have their sorting. And for them, it's important to have that horsepower there because they're on the conveyor belt for fractions of a second. And so they have to make a decision in a fraction of a second, and go into cloud is almost impossible because the round trip time exceeds the time that the letter or the mail piece is actually on the conveyor belt. And so there they put all the horsepower out there. And that's the case where, again, high performance computing, 200 servers with 4 to 8 GPUs each and all the stuff that goes with it, but it pays for itself. And that's the thing that they've been doing is I was involved in a fraud system for them that basically stopped millions of dollars in fraud per day for something that paid for itself in a week. And so when you start looking at what you can build, when you get onto the high end, for deploying that, it gets pretty exciting. But you were asking about some of the recommendations. I mean, first, start with a goal in mind. I think what happens is so often we, start as a learning experiment, which is okay up to a point. And I think all agencies suffered in doing this with Hadoop. We all had our Hadoop cluster to learn what it could do. And I think that AI, we're a little bit more cautious now, but we're also able to start even smaller, because we can go to the cloud, experiment in the cloud when it's time to maybe deploy. And what we do is you put in our systems, with all these NVIDIA GPUs in it, and we can do that en masse. I mean, I'm working with Department of Defense, Department of Energy, a lot of organizations that to them, that's very mission critical, National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, right, NOAA. All of them have a very short period of time. So a lot of servers with a lot of GPUs matters, and it's cost prohibitive to go to the cloud. Now, on the other hand, when you're starting up, it's really cost advantageous to go to the cloud during the startup. So it's kind of an interesting combination there. But the other thing is go for the low-hanging fruit. If you go to the low-hanging fruit first, don't try and boil the ocean. You come up with something that is achievable. I think what Sanjay, you and your group did is the right way to go. Find some tools that already exist that you can tune, because if you look at what the cloud vendors have, what NVIDIA has with their NVIDIA GPU cloud stack of software, others like that, what it does is it provides you with a real basis of software that all you do is you tune it to your need. And that's a great way to start.
Sanjay, any last recommendation to your colleagues out there on moving forward with AI and ML?
Just building on what Steve said, I want to reemphasize the importance of the whole culture piece and readiness and understanding where people are at, and even understanding what it is and the impact it can have on programs. If people don't understand that at the basic level, or maybe even some of the misinterpretations around what AI may or may not do in relationship to their jobs or their expertise that they're bringing to the table, it becomes really hard. So education, understanding readiness, doing co-engagement, so that as you're going through these pilots, you're going through some of these discovery areas, you're not just doing it with these agencies, but also working with them to share the results. Like, we've had some really positive experiences, and other ones where it's like, let's fail fast. Technology is not mature enough. This really isn't ready for, it's not giving us the desired effect, but that becomes really key. And I see the other thing is just also getting people within your organization that have the skill sets that can work with the vendors and can help to really understand and grow with the program as we try to determine not just some of these pilots, but where can AI really make fundamental improvements to our programs and have results.
Yeah.
Well, some great points. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for today, but Sanjay Koyani and Steve Heibein, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights on the application of AI and ML in the federal government.
Thank you. And I just wanted to leave with that. My colleagues are telling me that if you want to follow any things or all the ongoings with DOL and our Chief Information Office, you can get us at Twitter at OCIO_DOL. And we're also on LinkedIn.
Terrific.
Thank you.